Well, good day, viewers. Today we have a 2017 Buick Enclave. It's here for some routine maintenance, but his major concern is a humming noise coming from the rear driveline, like a wheel bearing type noise. I haven't road tested it yet. It's got 130,000 kilometers on it. It's apparently had both front wheel bearings replaced earlier. The other secondary issue is the blind spot detection. Indicators in the mirrors are lit up like there's something in the blind spot, and there's a bulletin on it, but it doesn't apply to the Enclave for whatever reason, a policy adjustment. But we're going to take it for a road test and listen to this humming noise and see if it feels like or sounds like a wheel bearing, or if it's in the differential, or where it might be. So I can hear a hum at 55 to 60 kilometers an hour, and I'm driving on a snow covered road, so it's not tires. Appears to be from the back. Get on some pavement. So you can definitely hear it now. It sounds like it's in the right rear to me, but sometimes it's hard to tell because of telescopes. It sounds like a rear wheel bearing to me. Definitely a wheel bearing type noise, because when I turn to the right, the noise diminishes. Well, it'll be almost impossible to show other than the procedure. If you grab the coil spring and squeeze it with your hands and spin the wheel, you can feel roughness on this side. The coil spring seems to amplify it. That one feels smooth on that side, so I'm going to call this wheel bearing. But we're also going to check the rear axle fluid, quality, color, condition, and see if there's any concerns with it. So remove the tire and remove the brake caliper bolts, two 21mm headed bolts here. Take the caliper off as an assembly. Brake pads are in excellent condition, the rotor's in good condition, so we're not doing any brake work. And then there's three bolts that hold this wheel bearing in. We have to take the rotor off, and obviously the axle nut. This looks like about a T25, T30 Torx bit, so we'll take that off, take the rotor off, and continue. So it's a T30 bolt. You can use the impact screwdriver. Just smack the head of the bolt a couple of times with a hammer to shock it so that you don't break off your Torx bit when the impact driver usually comes off, but sometimes you'll break those bits. So now we can leave the backing plate and parking brake shoes here. Put some penetrating fluid on the three bolts that hold the wheel bearing in from the back here, and we'll remove the bolts. So the axle nut's 34mm. Tap the axle shaft in, remove the three 18mm headed bolts, and I've got some long head bolts here from a Volkswagen that I'm using, and I'm using the air chisel, as you can see, with a long rod to hammer it out. So I got like a nipple on the end of my, yeah, that's free now. You got to be careful because it's going to come out pretty fast. It's usually seized in there pretty good because of the aluminum knuckle and the steel hub. So there's the wheel bearing out. It does feel rough. As I said, you want to be careful when you're tapping this bearing out because there's a plastic speed sensor here, and your chances of removing that speed sensor from the knuckle are slim. So you want to make sure the axle stays inboard while you're tapping the bearing out. Now we've got to clean up all this oxidized aluminum and the surface and this surface here and reassemble it. So there's the housing cleaned up. I use a die grinder with a bit on it, and then Rolox sanding disc on the surface. Clean the bolts. We're going to put Loctite on the bolts and never seize on this section here and never seize on the splines. Clean the backing plate off and give it a coat of paint. So there's the bearing back in. The axle nut out here is 151 foot-pounds. The 3 bolts that hold the hub bearing on, those 3 inside there, are 96 foot-pounds, and the bolts that hold the brake caliper bracket on here are 129 foot-pounds. But always double check the specs. Don't trust anything I say. We're going to wait to tighten this up when we get the caliper on, so I can put a screwdriver under the rotor to keep it from turning. So putting a standard screwdriver between the fins on the rotor and the caliper allows you to hold the rotor while you torque the spec. Otherwise you got to put the brakes on, and I don't have a helper here. So Loctite on this nut. I think technically you're supposed to replace that nut, but it's sure it's not going to come off. Again, caliper bracket is bolted on. Make sure the brake hose doesn't get twisted. It's not, and we're ready to put the wheel back on by the looks of it. Everything's torqued. We should be good to go. Well, it seems nice and quiet now. No more hum. No warning lights on, but those stupid lights in the mirror are irritating. I wonder if they're hardwired from the door modules. I wonder if they could be disabled by just depinning a wire at the door module. I might look into that for him. I think he said he was going to put stick-on mirrors on there to cover them up, those little ones. But the wheel bearing noise is fixed.